Hello, everybody. Welcome this afternoon or whenever you're listening. This is Dr. Carolyn Dean's webinar on fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, free of charge to the public. So very thrilled that you can be with us and to get this great information. And I hope that you're settled in with your glass of water or maybe even your glass of Remag and Remite. Get your pen and paper ready. And of course, we will provide you a link to the archive as well. But take notes as you're going along because it does help to reinforce what you're learning. And what we're going to be talking about today is the real truth about fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. We're going to talk about what causes these conditions. We're going to talk about how they are misdiagnosed. And ladies and gentlemen, highly and epically misdiagnosed. And we're also going to talk about the role of nutrient deficiencies in this whole dynamic. So whether you have a loved one or a friend who's been affected, or even if you're just a person who's concerned like I am about Lady Gaga, I love Lady Gaga. It's so sad that she's getting so hurt by all of this and by the misdiagnosis and by not having the proper information. You're going to be thrilled that you tuned in today. Let me just say a couple things. First of all, you're watching hopefully live on YouTube, and if you are, you'll see on the right-hand side of the page that there is a chat box where you can type in questions to me. We will take the questions as we go along today. So if you have a question, be sure to put it there, and then I will insert it as I can with Dr. Dean speaking. The second thing is, let me just introduce Dr. Carolyn Dean in case you've never heard of her before. And you know what? Maybe you've been in the medical model your whole life. Maybe you have been taught to believe that drugs and procedures or maybe even surgeries are the cure to your situation. Maybe you've been on medication for 15 or 20 years trying to deal with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. And maybe you do not know one thing about Dr. Carolyn Dean or who she is. I'm going to try to bring some information to you today that will open up your mind and say, first of all, that Dr. Carolyn Dean is a medical doctor. So you're going to be hearing from a medical doctor again, somebody who's gone to medical school, somebody who worked as a medical doctor, not only in hospitals, but also in her own private practice, but then somebody who went on beyond that into the area of natural medicine to look at how nutrition and how nutrients could actually help the body and help relieve symptoms as well or even better than sometimes drugs, which, by the way, a lot of them come from plants and other places. So she pursued that education. She's got 50 years of working with the public and the community in her own communities and around the world now. And not only that, she has developed her own formulas, very specific, scientifically based formulas that have real application in the body for relieving chronic conditions such as fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. Dr. Dean is an absolute joy. She's one of the most compassionate women I've ever known in my life. She's incredibly brilliant and smart, and she's going to share what she knows about these symptoms with you and give you some insights that may change your approach to how you want to interact and work with your body, and also what you want to feed your body, especially if you suffer from this condition. So welcome today to your webinar, Dr. Carolyn Dean.
Thank you, Ginny. Thanks again for the wonderful introduction that I get every week on our 2-hour radio show and on our webinars. So fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, I was in practice in 1979 before chronic fatigue syndrome and later fibromyalgia came on the scene. So I can very easily say that I watched its development. And instead of going through the whole webinar and then coming to my conclusion, I will give you the conclusion first of what I believe is causing this epidemic of fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, and then explain throughout the webinar why I've come to that conclusion. So in my second slide, what we're looking at is the major causes of fibro and chronic fatigue syndrome, magnesium and mineral deficiency, and yeast overgrowth. Now, if you've read anything that I've written or been to other webinars, you know that's my basic premise for all chronic disease is magnesium and mineral deficiencies and yeast overgrowth. And the next slide about the downward spiral that is experienced by people who seem to get into these terrible situations with chronic symptomatology. We've got a scenario that many people identify with. It looks horrendous, but if you stop for a moment, you see how having diaper rash as a child will put you on cortisone creams that then reduces your immune system ability to deal with infections. So you end up with childhood ear infections. But even before that, if your mom had yeast overgrowth and yeast vaginitis, and if you had a vaginal delivery, you're going to possibly have your diaper rash immediately because you've been exposed to yeast. You can have yeast ear infections that are misdiagnosed and treated with antibiotics. I would see that all the time in my general practice up in Toronto. And then the antibiotics you take for your ear infections can lead to the colitis. The doctors think you're having problem with your breast milk, and you're put on soy formula. You develop allergy to soy, you develop dairy allergy, you get tubes in your ears, and the anesthetic reduces your immune system, and on and on and on. You can read through this as, perhaps a history of your life. The next slide continues the downward spiral with getting mercury amalgams when you go to the dentist, being treated with antibiotics for acne, and your immune system is so weak when you go off to university, you develop mononucleosis, and that's Epstein-Barr. And, we knew this, 35 years ago, and all of a sudden people are saying, oh, chronic fatigue is Epstein-Barr as if it's something new. There is nothing new about this condition. It's just more layers of toxins and problems. And bladder infections in women mostly treated with antibiotics. The ones now that are most problematic are the Cipro antibiotic. It's a fluoroquinolone, which has fluoride added to it to make it stronger. And then the fluoroquinolone, actually, they're being implicated in fibromyalgia specifically. And, people are saying, well, that's the cause. Well, unfortunately, it's only one of the possible causes. Birth control pill will cause yeast overgrowth, pregnancy hormones, more yeast, IBS, or the irritable bowel syndrome symptoms are a manifestation of yeast overgrowth. It goes on. If you have so much irritation in your sinuses that you get chronically infected there, 97% of chronic sinus infections are related to fungal overgrowth, but you're given more antibiotics. Then you're developing hypothyroidism, and chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia are finally kind of manifesting. I'm kind of going chronologically here. We saw so many people developing environmental allergies where anything inhaled or ingested was irritating, and that's in relationship to yeast overgrowth. The yeast will invade any mucous membrane, including your sinuses, and they'll start irritating it and kind of poking little holes into your sinuses, making you very sensitive to inhaled allergens. They'll poke little holes in your intestines, and there you get your leaky gut and your bowel irritation. It goes on, the infertility that's caused often by the hormonal disruption of the yeast overgrowth leads to all these incredible fertility drugs. And I don't know what the health of the children who've been born by fertility drugs. I don't know if they've done studies, comparative studies on the health of those kids, but I would imagine that being exposed to so many drugs in utero could be problematic. We finish up the downward spiral with, kind of the final continuing symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, along with depression, anxiety, panic attacks, palpitations. These are all magnesium deficiency and yeast overgrowth symptoms. They're not, I don't consider them diseases myself, although some people get kind of annoyed that I'm trying to say they don't have a problem. I'm not saying you don't have a problem. Partly I'm trying to protect myself from the FDA, who doesn't want me to equate magnesium deficiency with a disease. So I'm saying the magnesium deficiency symptoms are being misdiagnosed, and I'm trying to set the record straight. The next slide, then, I'm looking at the first of my causes of chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, magnesium and mineral deficiency. And just to show you how they lead to the following misdiagnosis, and then people think, oh my gosh, I have all these things wrong with me: the low thyroid, the adrenal fatigue, the genetic mutations. The most popular one these days is MTHFR, glutathione deficiency, nerve and muscle weakness and sensitivity caused by magnesium deficiency, and the mitochondrial dysfunction. So hopping right along to the next slide, the bottom is your titled magnesium and hypothyroidism. So what's happening there is the thyroid and adrenals and sex hormones form a stable triad where if one is low or deficient, then the others have to be overworked to try to compensate. And then eventually they become deficient as well. Some people who specialize in thyroid say, well, you have to treat thyroid first. People who specialize in adrenals say, oh, you have to treat adrenals first. The body doesn't work like that. You support everything all the time with the right minerals and nutrients. So I'm saying that mineral depletion, yeast toxins, and severe stress are causing adrenal fatigue and premature menopause. The thyroid requires 9 minerals in order to function properly and make thyroid hormones. And these minerals are iodine, selenium, zinc, molybdenum, boron, copper, chromium, manganese, and magnesium. And most people think, oh yeah, I need lots of iodine for my thyroid. And if you do that, you start producing products that are stimulated by the iodine. You produce what we call an end product that will build and build and build unless it has selenium in order to advance to the next biochemical reaction. So it's a stepwise process that requires all these minerals, and we totally we ignore them, forget about them, don't study them, and don't allow ourselves access to them. What I've done to help you replace these minerals is offer Remite, which is a stabilized ionic form of 12 minerals that can restore thyroid function and many, many other biochemical pathways in the body. Right, today we're kind of focusing on thyroid and adrenals. The next slide is about magnesium and adrenal fatigue. So people are going to say that fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, they're all about the adrenals, and they'll focus on that. I'm saying it's one of the aspects, but the adrenal fatigue is going to come from a magnesium deficiency to begin with, and then the treatment for the adrenals, the last box there, is going to be magnesium, hopefully Remag, the B vitamins, and you'll find that in Realign. Vitamin C, that's in our Restructure. You can also have your food-based vitamin C in your fruit or in a food-based supplement. And rest, my blog, Lying Down Therapy, is very popular because sometimes people just need a prescription to take a rest, take a break, and not try to force their way into feeling better, or force action at a time when you really just need to sit down and take a breather. So the rest of that in the slides you can read now or later, but as I said, it's the triad of thyroid, adrenals, and sex hormones. The next slide goes into this whole genetic business. As I say in the first box, genetic testing, all the rage. And for the most part, it's a useless exercise because there are no treatments for gene mutations. And it just scares people into thinking they have unsolvable problems. Now, that's a vast generalization. Some people may benefit from knowing this or that. But when you say to someone, well, these are your top 20 or top 50 genetic mutations, I mean, what are you going to do? It would just make my hair stand on end. And with the MTHFR mutation, it makes you less able to methylate and detoxify toxins such as mercury and lead. And the more mutations you have, the higher your requirements for the methylated B6, B12, and folate in order to help your detoxification pathways work properly. The treatment, Realign, has these methylated Bs as well as a precursor to glutathione, which is our major antioxidant and detoxifier in the body. And what I say about detoxifying, even chelating, is that I don't really agree with people taking purges to detoxify their body. I really think it's important to give the body building blocks to support what the liver is already doing, take the pressure off the liver somewhat, and let the body detoxify at its own rate, at its own time, instead of, in the middle of the day and, with an IV in your arm at a doctor's office. Your body wants to detoxify at night, when you're at rest. So that's my take on detoxifying. A little later, I'll say, yes, do some saunas, do some Epsom salts baths, but, watch out for all these purges or chelation. The next slide, I did mention about the precursor of glutathione in Realign. It is methionine. And this is a building block to make the glutathione to do your detox when your body wants to do it. Glutathione is hugely important. We used to have to give it intravenously because oral glutathione itself is rapidly broken down in the liver. To make a glutathione that the body accepts, it's a very expensive process. So these nutrients are quite expensive. So that's another reason why I stick with Realign to support your glutathione. So people are saying, if you have chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, it's because your glutathione is low and you should take intravenous glutathione or expensive glutathione products. The next slide is another you're misdiagnosed as having nerve and muscle sensitivity. I mean, even to the point of being told you have multiple sclerosis or that you need really strong medications to deal with nerve problems. But when magnesium is deficient in the nerves and muscles, they become much more sensitive to toxic insults, which creates symptoms of spasm, pain, numbness, tingling, and burning. And, we'll hear from our customers. I put a case in my 2017 edition of Magnesium Miracle about a young mother of 4 who started getting this horrible burning up the back of her scalp and head, and it was driving her to distraction. And every time she went to the doctor and just was miserable and complaining and saying, I can't stand this anymore, the more drugs they would give her. And it took me months to really, really get it through her head that it's mainly magnesium deficiency. Keep taking the Remag, keep slowly building up your levels as your body heals. So it is a major educational position we put ourselves in to try to help people. And again, the FDA has not been supportive of our efforts to educate the public. So, sometimes our hands are tied about this, and that's why the webinars are important. So I can say over and over again, we're not treating diseases, we're treating deficiencies. So the list of offending substances that can be toxic to the nerves and the muscles keeps growing. Back in the 80s, when I was running webinars and just in-person seminars about chronic yeast overload and chronic fatigue syndrome, we were talking about environmental chemicals and drugs, even street drugs and over-the-counter drugs. And now people come to me and say, Botox triggered their fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, or fluoroquinolones, or mercury, mercury fillings. And you see what people do is then they'll say, well, it's all about the Botox, or it's all about the fluoroquinolones, and that's what caused my problem, whereas it's probably the straw that broke the camel's back. And they had all these other triggers, instances, this buildup. And finally, when they got that Botox, they had so little magnesium to protect themselves that they succumbed. The next slide is about the mitochondria. As practitioners and some of the biohackers and the interested parties dig deeper into chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, they'll say, oh, it's mitochondrial dysfunction, that's what it is. And one of the things about the mitochondria, as I've mentioned many times, I don't have it in these slides, but the mitochondria are where in the cells, they're where the Krebs cycle plays out to make your ATP energy molecules. The energy of the body is made in mitochondria. And what can happen to mitochondria when we don't have enough magnesium, our tissues become saturated with more calcium. The calcium is not dissolved by magnesium. So what happens in the mitochondria, and it's written here, to protect the fluid inside our cells from becoming too saturated with calcium, a magnesium-dependent mechanism shunts calcium into the mitochondria. And this can backfire if too much calcium is taken up for too long. The excess calcium in the mitochondria inhibits ATP synthesis, and the mitochondrial calcification without intervention of sufficient magnesium eventually results in cell death. And my question is, could calcium excess and magnesium deficiency be the underlying cause of mitochondrial dysfunction that many natural medicine practitioners say can trigger chronic fatigue and other chronic diseases? Now, when I've made statements like that, a recent blog I did about mitochondria and fibromyalgia, people were saying to me, well, it's not all about magnesium. There's this enzyme, someone said fluoroquinolones specifically are, what's the name of this? Topoisomerase, or Topoisomerase inhibitors that kill and damage mitochondria directly by interfering with DNA replication, which is much more serious than magnesium deficiency. So when you look up topoisomerase inhibitors, they are dependent on magnesium for their function. So who's to say that these enzymes, if they had sufficient magnesium, could keep doing their work, and the magnesium would protect them? Because we know the fluoride in the fluoroquinolones is probably to blame for damage. And what magnesium does is it binds up the fluoride and makes the fluoride unavailable, makes the magnesium unavailable. It unfortunately also does some damage because it's a brittle substance that deposits in our tendons, etc., and can cause tendon rupture. But you know, my whole question is, what if someone is saturated with enough magnesium that these enzymes don't get inhibited, the calcium doesn't build up, and we don't know enough about that. But you know, what we do know is not everybody is damaged by fluoroquinolones, and could the people who aren't damaged have sufficient magnesium? And that's another reason why I keep promoting magnesium as a baseline treatment for protection and to try to remove these toxins.
Carolyn, on this topic of mitochondria, one of our long-standing customers in Wisconsin, Mark, he typed in a comment for me, and he said, you know, that he's been taking Remag for over a year now, and he expects to be taking it for quite some time. But he said that there's a PhD in San Diego who is uncovering a crucial link to normalizing mitochondria and energy production. And he's going to be conducting a clinical trial making up of women's patients and all these other kinds of things. I mean, is this what you're talking about, that until you have your magnesium straight, you can't really be looking at, you know, any kind of supplemental treatment for mitochondria? I mean, if you don't have magnesium straight, what's going on in there, right?
Right, yes. You see, doctors don't know enough about therapeutic use of magnesium. They just think it's a laxative. You can only take a couple 100 milligrams before you get diarrhea. So how can you work with it? So they don't realize that Remag, being non-laxative, you can saturate your body, you can really populate your mitochondria with enough magnesium to make the Krebs cycle work and to give you energy. I mean, everybody who takes Remag says, oh, I got my energy back. So yeah, it's just this, you know, theoretical research on these topics without looking at without properly looking at nutrients. And it's another thing that drives me crazy, that they're trying to, in some cases, they'll insert one of the intermediary products in the Krebs cycle, like pyruvate, and say, well, you know, maybe if we put some pyruvate in there, we'll get the Krebs cycle working better. But you will seriously never get anywhere unless you use magnesium first, and afterwards you can do whatever you want, but you have to saturate with magnesium first. You know, they're always coming up with something new. There's this NRF2 anti-aging supplement. And all of a sudden, some theoretical researcher wrote about NRF2 and said, oh my, look, it causes a certain stress in the body, where the body will then mount a reaction to the stress. And in mounting the reaction to the stress, it will give the body more energy. Now, you're stressing the body, for one thing, and that's not what someone with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia needs, because when you mount an attack against a stress, you are using extra magnesium. You can say that for saunas. You can say that for the cold stress. That's all the rage now. Any quote stress you do on the body is not something you do with someone with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, but it's being promoted right, left, and center. Same with vitamin D. Oh, we have to use a whole bunch of vitamin D for people with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, not realizing it overutilizes their magnesium and makes them even more deficient in all the things we're talking about. And back to the NRF2 supplements, and immediately the research, theoretical research comes out. Now we have the products. And now a few years later, the research says, well, half the time it might work and half the time it might make you worse. So you really have to be careful about this marketing of supplements where they've just begun the research.
Also, somebody typed in on our chat line, Carolyn, Amy, and she said, my underlying problem besides Epstein-Barr virus is the HPA axis, which is the, for people who don't know, it's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And she said that comes from a trauma, apparently, that she's experienced. Do you have any suggestion of any type of treatment or therapy in conjunction with the nutrients that you're talking about today, Carolyn?
Well, it's the same thing we're talking about, Amy. The hypothalamus pituitary will try to force the adrenals to protect us with adrenaline and norepinephrine, etc. And if the adrenals aren't supported properly with your magnesium, your methylated Bs, and your vitamin C and rest, then you have trouble recuperating. So it's still what we're talking about. We're talking about the Remag, the Realign, the B, which has the B vitamins, and the vitamin C, either in Restructure or in your fruit. The hypothalamus pituitary, even the pineal. The pineal especially, they're talking about it being calcified. Well, that's where you need your magnesium to be saturated in your body. In terms of trauma, physical or emotional trauma, we work with total biology. I don't have that in my slides, but for grief and trauma, Ginny has it on the website. You can search for it, or Ginny can tell us right now, where we have affirmations, Bach flower remedies, and just a focus on trying to release the psychological, emotional conflict that this trauma brings. Because when someone has had a major trauma in their life, and they think they've dealt with it, the next time they have a similar psychological, emotional, or mental trauma, it kind of feeds back, it triggers back to the previous. So it is something that we do often recommend to people to go to our total biology consultant, Dr. David Holt, to figure out where the conflict lies and why a person is holding on to it. What purpose is it serving, and can we modify that so you don't keep getting triggered every time you have a trauma?
And Carolyn, I mean, I guess the other thing is just if you could say, here are these really complicated sounding things. I mean, it just impresses me right now. We're talking about mitochondria, and we're talking about the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which are these big honking medical terms or physiological, biological terms. And yet you're just making it sound like that you can just take magnesium and Remite and things like that, and you're going to get better. And how could that be? Because aren't these things kind of complicated?
Well, we've made them complicated, and it really absolutely stems from the fact is we've ignored nutrients in our medical and our research training of young doctors. The PhDs know nothing about nutrients. the MDs know nothing about nutrients. So when they go about their biohacking on these systems, they don't have a clue of the basic building blocks that we have to address before we go into the esoteric. I mean, you know, when I read some of these PhD researchers, they're all so excited about the you know, most recent study that shows that the latest is the association of vitamin D and autism. And all of a sudden, you know, it's as if that's the cause of autism. And not once do they mention, well, you know, if you're going to take these high levels of vitamin D, you better get your magnesium because you're going to make people worse on other levels. So they get all excited, and you can debate either side of the vitamin D quandary. I'm debating that you have to go easy. You know, that's always going to be my stance. You know, go low and slow, because anytime you introduce a major nutrient in the body, you're going to affect so many other things. But you know what I'm so impressed with magnesium about, especially the Remag, because it doesn't cause the initial diarrhea. I'm so impressed with magnesium because when you become saturated, when your body is clicking along on all the 700, 800 different enzymatic processes, if you take a little extra that you don't really need, you will get the laxative effect. Your body knows. So magnesium is also always going to have that fail-safe so that it's not going to do anything untoward if you, quote, take too much.
Thank you, Carolyn. That's excellent. Yeah, I think it's really important to reinforce those points because I just know that people have been, you know, if you've had chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia for any length of time, they've just been diagnosed so many different ways and have been told so many different things. But I think it's really important that they just really open up and consider, you know, what might be available to them if they look at nutrients first. I mean, that is the basis for health, right?
Right, right. And we've just gotten so esoteric, and all the things that are coming up now with chronic disease, where people will say, well, you know, it's all about the genes. Well, it's not. It's about how the cofactors that turn genes on and off are related to the body. And the biggest cofactor in genetics is magnesium. So yes, we really have to pull back to the basics, and it is quite frustrating because the field is so wide open. You know, the internet is so wide open, and people can write anything they want. And you know, when you go and use Dr. Google, you'll find out all kinds of horrible things. People just want to make it as horrible as possible, it seems. You know, when this gentleman said, well, you know, she's not thinking about the damage caused by this enzyme. And it's like, well, maybe I have thought about it. Maybe I know that that enzyme is directed by magnesium, and maybe that enzyme will work properly and won't get damaged by fluoroquinolones if you have enough magnesium. And that's my premise all along.
The gal, Carolyn, that we were talking about, Amy, with the Epstein-Barr, she said that she's tried meditation, theta healing, EMDR, and CBT, and still can't seem to regulate her nervous system. So, Amy, if you'd like to email me at support, SUPPORT, at rnareset.com, I can share with you the information about the total biology person that Dr. Dean recommends. And that goes for anybody. If you're listening to this webinar later and you have a question, you can email support at rnareset.com or question at drcarolyndeanlive.com. Either one will get it to us. Tara types in Carolyn and says, what should someone take to get all the things in realigned but has interstitial cystitis and can't take the betaine HCl?
Well, the betaine HCl, it is only 50 milligrams. I don't know if you've tried the realign, or you're just concerned because it's on the ingredient list. So in terms of getting the other things, it's often, taking two or three different products to try to get everything in there. I don't know what else to say. I don't know if anyone's ever asked us before about, having a problem with betaine HCl.
I do know that we have several people who've gotten rid of their interstitial cystitis using Remag, though. I do know that. So that's
right,
good.
right. Yep. And treating the yeast overgrowth, which is the next topic. And I think people should be prepared for us going over time, because there is so much to cover and we don't want to answer all your questions. Are we ready to proceed?
Yes, go ahead, Carolyn.
So the next slide is the yeast overgrowth syndrome. I call it YOS, Y-O-S, just because in the book I recently wrote, Reset the Yeast Connection, I just get tired of typing yeast overgrowth syndrome all the time. And yeast is natural. It lives in your intestines. Antibiotics kill off good and bad bacteria. Yeast will survive, and then they'll grow up from the large intestine into your small intestine, poke holes in it, and give you 100 different symptoms as the yeast toxins are absorbed through those punctures. It's not necessarily the case that yeast organisms get into your bloodstream through the leaky gut. That's more of a systemic yeast infection that people may develop who are hospitalized with cancer and AIDS virus, for example. Everyone I've seen with fibromyalgia and CFS has had yeast overgrowth syndrome. And the treatment, right at the beginning, I'll tell you, it is a diet. It's probiotics. Our Prescript Assist is the best, natural antifungals, and the complement formulas. And you can all download the book, Reset These Connections, so you can follow that protocol step by step. And the next slide, I'll go into what it's mistaken for. So people have said, well, I have gluten intolerance, or, that's one of their many symptoms. They don't realize it's related to yeast overgrowth, that when the gut gets so irritated, then that intestinal villi can't accept, is irritated by the gluten. It's almost like they may have some sort of gluten sensitivity. Gluten intolerance is a genetic condition, but their sensitivity is accentuated by yeast overgrowth, or if they have a bad intestinal infection, or they've had some trauma. Small intestinal bowel overgrowth is something that they're now calling what I consider to be yeast overgrowth. Mold toxicity, it's cross-reacts with yeast. Mercury toxicity, mercury acts like an antibiotic, so it'll cause yeast overgrowth. Antibiotic overuse, as I mentioned, kills good and bad bacteria. So it all comes back to yeast. The next slide about the gluten intolerance, we knew long ago that wheat cross-reacts with yeast. So the yeast diets used to be wheat-free, now they're gluten-free. And who knows what's going on with gluten precisely or individually. I just know I get gas and bloating with wheat in North America, but if I eat it in Europe, I do not get gas and bloating. So it may be the hybridization of wheat in this country that creates more gluten and makes us more sensitive. Gluten intolerance has been misdiagnosed as dozens of different diseases. It's a food intolerance, but most symptoms are not digestive, so it's hard to pinpoint. In treating yeast and removing wheat and eventually gluten, we eliminate this fibro trigger. So when I tell most people with chronic disease to go on a yeast-free diet, so that means gluten-free, and that's one of the way, as I just said, it's here we eliminate this trigger. The next slide, just quickly, some of the symptoms of gluten intolerance, the abdominal pain, anxiety, fatigue, headaches, diarrhea, constipation. So half of those I think of as magnesium deficiency, and half of them I think of as yeast overgrowth. And then there, well, maybe it's a third, because gluten intolerance itself can cause, as I mentioned here, the impaired nutrient absorption. And the nutrient absorption of our products, the Remag, Remite, and Recalcia, don't require a healthy intestinal wall or lining in order to be absorbed. So that's one of the many reasons why they work so well, is you don't have to have an intact intestinal lining, because I've heard some practitioners tell our customers, well, why bother taking any nutrients? You got to heal your gut first, because nothing will be absorbed. And that's just horrible advice. The next slide, small intestinal bowel overgrowth. And I think of it mainly as a new designation for YAWS, but their focus is on bacteria, not yeast. It's like all the probiotic research is on bacteria, and they just don't look at yeast at all. And unfortunately, one of the treatments for SIBO is antibiotics, which just grows more yeast. And to treat SIBO, you treat yeast, diet, probiotics, natural antifungals, and the complement formulas. The next slide, it's not recognized enough, this business about mold cross-reacting with yeast. If you have yeast overgrowth, you will react to mold in your environment. And, it comes up to me with the Katrina, now all the recent hurricanes, that people are going to be suffering from the water damage, the growth of mold. Unfortunately, it's like their homes really have to be burned. You can't take the moldy boards and rebuild. Very unfortunate. The treatment is to eliminate sources of mold and treat yeast overgrowth. The next slide. Mercury, people will list that as one of the causes of fibromyalgia, CFS, and it is, but I don't know if they understand it can be because you don't have enough magnesium to help detoxify, or the other minerals that support the liver, or the precursor to glutathione. But also mercury is acting like an antibiotic, killing off good bacteria and causing yeast overgrowth. And I think most people agree that if you have more than 6 mercury amalgam surfaces, you should have hair, urine, and blood testing to see if you should have your amalgams removed. I really don't support the use of challenge testing for mercury. They give you a chelating agent like DMSA, and then they see how much it stirs up out of your body and that you urinate out. So they measure it in your urine. But that mercury circulating in your body can be absorbed in your body is storing it and trying to sequester it and keep it away from you. But if you bring it to the surface out of storage, it's going to circulate through your body and your brain. And I've seen people get very sick after a mercury challenge test. Now, I'm not saying everybody does, but I'm just thinking my Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. The next, we're on to the general treatment protocol. I mentioned earlier saunas and Epsom salts baths. Now, you do have to be aware that saunas are going to make you sweat out a lot of your minerals. So you really do have to be on your sea salted water, your proper hydration, half your body weight in pounds, that number of ounces of drinking water a day, and then in every liter of drinking water, a quarter teaspoon of sea salt. Epsom salts baths, you can also put in a cup or two of apple cider vinegar. That will help pull out toxins. A half a cup of baking soda can help as well to pull out acidic toxins. And then gentle, gradual exercise. That's very important. A lot of people say, well, exercise helps everything. That will help your energy. Well, people who have a lot of toxins in their muscles already, who don't have enough magnesium to get rid of the lactic acid from exercise, who don't have enough magnesium for energy in general, do not do well with exercise. I think what happened with Lady Gaga is she would, with her fibromyalgia, her chronic fatigue, she would have to perform, and she'd get her adrenaline going, and she'd really push herself, and she'd have so much adrenaline that it would overcome her pain, and she'd force herself into her role as Lady Gaga, and then she'd collapse. And collapsing is not the same as lying down therapy. You should not push yourself to the point of collapse, but regularly do lying down therapy, along with your Remag, Remite, Recalcia if you're not eating dairy products. And the complement formulas are all there, all structured to support a body overcoming chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. We'll go to the next slide, and it's just showing the complement formulas. Most people are aware of them. I won't go over every individual formula unless people ask specific questions. The slide will sit on while we're waiting for more questions is the resources, the Magnesium Miracle book. You can get that at Amazon. Our free books at drcarolyndeanlive.com, our product website, RNA Reset, my resources at drcarolyndean.com, or my online wellness program, free newsletter. Our radio show and archives are at Dr. Carolyn Dean Live. And as I always say, go Google any question into my name and see what comes up. See if we don't just answer your question. I guess you could, let's go to the question slide and then jump right to the free bonus material slide, Chad, because what I do with the webinar gifts is give a couple of free modules of my online wellness program, Complement Now, and what we've got is my I forget what I've got, a couple of diet ones and a couple of sort of slow exercise, slow healing. Lying down therapy is a blog. But oh yes, I have something about when you're lying in bed, there are things that you can do to help heal. So over to you, Ginny.
Okay, let's do a couple questions, Carolyn. One of them is coming in from Yvonne. She says, you mentioned Realign has methylated Bs. My genetic report says to avoid all methylated forms. My ND put me on hydroxy B12 because the methylated form is not raising my B12 levels. What do you suggest for me?
Well, you have to do what your doctor said. I can't tell you to go against what you've been told or what your genetic testing shows.
Okay, very good. Here's Joanna here, and she's saying, I just want to tell you that I love, love, love these webinars. They are so informative. I just got back from my yearly visit to my cardiologist. My EKG showed the heart of a young woman, Those were his words. My AFib is a thing of the past. Of course, I attribute that all to Remag and Remite. I do have a question for you, Carolyn. I feel great during the day, but at night I don't feel like I get a restful sleep. When I wake up, my legs, arms, and shoulders feel tense and tight, and sometimes I actually feel exhausted. Once I awake, I do some deep breathing. In a few minutes, I feel all my muscles relax. Any suggestions on what may help?
Well, personally, what I would do is take a good dose of Remag at bedtime, because it sounds like your body, the muscles are kind of tensing up from a magnesium deficiency overnight. Certainly, as you say, your AFib is better, and that's due to the minerals. So, yeah, some more Remag at night. Make sure you are hydrated, because when you're lying in bed 6-8 hours at night, you're not drinking water. So it's very important to be hydrated before you go to bed. Although people say, "Well, I get up to use the bathroom," but just think about that: hydration with your sea salt and water, more magnesium at night, and I guess those are the main things. I mean, if you were having bad dreams or nightmares, I'd think about just doing some affirmations at bedtime.
Okay, excellent. Sam types in, I'm watching your webinar. Thank you so much for the information. I have a condition called electromagnetic hypersensitivity. My nervous system is heightened and I get stress headaches by various triggers. I do not feel well when I'm near Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and cell phone signals. Is there a way I can calm my nervous system?
I did a small section about that, Sam, in my 2017 Magnesium Miracle book, because there is research out now that shows that there's some problems with calcium channels, too much calcium in people who have hypersensitivity. And when I read about calcium, I know that a person must be deficient in magnesium if there's too much calcium. So to me, it's time to saturate with magnesium. Many people have said to us that they. I think it was in a recent radio show. Someone said they get all irritable around their Wi-Fi, and it was related to not having taken his Remag or something like that. But he took more Remag, and then his symptoms went away. So there is a relationship between magnesium deficiency and electromagnetic hypersensitivity.
Okay, wonderful. And for people who are hearing about magnesium as, a potential, solution for something like EMF sensitivity, Carolyn, what are you suggesting product-wise, and what are you suggesting the dosing would be?
Right. Well, on our labels, we talk about 1 teaspoon a day as maintenance. I'm on that now, but I used to take 4 teaspoons for my heart palpitations and leg cramps, which were magnesium deficiency symptoms. So it is anywhere from 1 to 4 teaspoons that a person can work with. When you're taking a large amount of magnesium, the 4 teaspoons is 1,200 milligrams. Each teaspoon has 300 milligrams. I really do recommend the sea salted water. Get enough water to so that the water and the minerals can work properly inside your cells. And I do recommend the Remite. We don't like to say that Remag is in any way a drug that you take for symptoms. Remag is something you're taking to build you up from a magnesium deficiency. If you're taking, one mineral in, large amounts, you want to balance the other minerals, and that's why we made Remite and Recalcia. The Remite dosage is 3/4 teaspoon twice a day, so that's 1.5 teaspoons a day. And the Recalcia is either 1 or 2 teaspoons a day, which is 300 to 600 milligrams a day, depending on how much calcium you're getting in your diet. My total recommendation of calcium daily is 600 milligrams. If you're taking dairy products, you could get at least 300, 400 milligrams of calcium in a yogurt or a kefir.
Okay, wonderful. And somebody typed in and said, if you get a racing heart when taking Remag, is it just a case of taking it more slowly?
It probably is, you know, when you're starting to rev up all your metabolic pathways, that, you know, getting your adrenal glands activated. You'll read about that in my blog, When Magnesium Makes Me Worse. And it's not that it makes people worse, but it changes a person. And that's where we got in the habit of saying to people, look, start with a quarter teaspoon and put it in your liter of sea salted water and sip it through the day. And every few days, add another quarter teaspoon. And, you know, we used to say in our one of the original labels, if you're a veteran magnesium taker, maybe you could start a little higher. But since Remag is 100% absorbed at the cellular level, it paces any other magnesium you've been taking, and it can start to rev you up, and it can detox you somewhat as well. So we get those questions, and we just have to remind people you're taking something very powerful and very necessary, so just go slowly.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, and one couple questions on these. Let's see. How much? Let's go to. We've had ringing ears and eye floaters. Any idea about either one of those, Carolyn?
Ringing ears, if it's because the hair cells in the ears are calcified, the magnesium can help. I personally put 1 or 2 drops of Remag in my ears a couple times a week. I was doing it every day for a while, and after a while it got a bit irritated. So ringing ears can be tinnitus. Tinnitus is very hard to deal with for some people. I mean, I have tinnitus, and I just don't even notice it anymore. I think of it as dolphins just singing to me. So it's something that you may have to get used to, or it can be something, if it's calcification, the magnesium can help. Eye floaters, no, they tend to be little vitreous threads that appear in your eye, and I don't really have any solutions for those. Some of the if there's a big floater, there are doctors who can zap them with a laser. I've even had that done. I've tried everything. I'm going to go and try that out. And, you know, it's painless. It was somewhat helpful for my floaters, but, you know, these are things that, you know, everybody has, and sometimes we just have to look beyond them.
Very good. Final question of the webinar, Carolyn, and then we'll try to bring it in, wrap it up. Let me just say again, if you're listening,
Ginny's busy looking at the questions, getting herself off mute. She'll be with us in a second.
I'm off mute.
I know Ginny did have a question that came in by email, and I'll look at those questions while we're waiting for Ginny.
Carolyn.
Fibro question. My daughter suffered with fibro for years. She has tried many, many treatments, but still suffers. I sent her the Remag Remite plus the RNA drops. She started with 1/8 of a teaspoon of Remag, but it caused her pain. How do you recommend her take it? I have recommended to reduce it even more and take it at night before bed. So yes, that's what some people will have, some sort of, you know, strong reaction, and we don't know why, but we've had people start with 1 drop a day. I mean, 1/8 of a teaspoon, yeah, that's like 7 drops, I think. So perhaps just 1 drop, and and taking it at night. But if you take it at night all at once, even the 1 drop, we say to dilute it in a liter of water.
Carolyn,
The other is from someone who's been on guavancine. I'll have to spell this. I don't know if I've got it right, but I've certainly heard of it over the years. Guaifenesin. It's a medication that loosens congestion in the chest and throat. And I guess years ago, somebody thought it was helpful for chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. I've never used it. I don't know how it works for those conditions. But what I would say is, if it's treating some sort of mucous membrane symptomatology, then perhaps it's treating yeast overgrowth. And I'd rather have people treat yeast. But basically, I don't know enough about this protocol to use it. And, I haven't heard enough about it to give any decent response.
Carolyn,
Ginny, are you back?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Wow. Chad, are you there?
Can you hear me? No.
Am
Hello?
I the one that's gone?
No, you're not gone. Can you hear?
Okay.
Can you hear me now? Carolyn?
I will come in again.
Carolyn?
Alrighty. Are we back? Is anyone there? Hi, guys. Am I back? Hello?
Carolyn, yes, you're back.
Carolyn, can you hear me? Carolyn? Carolyn, can you hear me?
Ginny, go ahead and present because Carolyn can't hear you for some reason, but I can hear you.
Okay, I'm back. I am back. Somehow my sound clicked off. Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
That was like an interesting thing happening. Okay, everybody, I just want to wrap up. Sorry, thanks for hanging in there with us. One thing we didn't talk about, Carolyn, is the Remag lotion. And Millie's asking how much lotion do you suggest using every day? Let's talk about that real quick, and then we can wrap it up.
Right. Well, if people are doing well on 600 milligrams of Remag, for example, Remag liquid, that's 2 teaspoons a day. And they want to stay with 600, then you would just cut back a little bit on your Remag oral and take your Remag lotion. 1 teaspoon is 200 milligrams. Actually, I keep bragging that I'm only on 1 teaspoon of Remag liquid, but I'm putting a teaspoon or 2 of Remag lotion on my body and, you know, feeling great and not having a laxative effect. So, I mean, suit yourself. It's hydrating my body so much that I don't have any of that chicken skin on my upper arms anymore. I slather my whole body with it. The other thing is, when I thought you were gone and I was on Ginny, I was answering those 2 questions about the woman whose daughter has fibro and that protocol of the guanfacine and fibromyalgia. Do you want me to quickly answer those?
Oh, I heard your answer.
Oh, good. Oh, okay.
Yep.
I just wasn't hearing you guys. You were hearing me blathering away. Okay.
Yep. We heard it. Okay, so I think everybody, we've gotten the information that we intended to present today. Sorry for a little technical snafu at the end. Let's also just add that, again, if you have questions, you can email your questions to support, SUPPORT, at rnareset.com. That's support at rnareset.com. And then we'll get the answers to you and resources as well. I also want to remind everybody, Dr. Dean does do a live radio broadcast on Monday evenings. And if you want to talk to her one-on-one, that's the place to do it. 7 p.m. Eastern Time on achieveradio.com. We send out the announcement every Monday. For the first half hour, Dr. Dean usually does some kind of a topical lecture about an important or relevant topic, and then we take live radio calls for the next 90 minutes. It's a tremendous way to connect with her and get that information that you need as a follow-up to this webinar or any other information that you'd like. And then finally, if you have questions, again, support at rnareset.com. We'll get back to you. The Dr. Carolyn Dean Live.com website is where we have all our product resources, including all Dr. Dean's free books. Dr. Carolyn, Carolyn, Dean, Dean, Live.com. Dr. Carolyn Dean Live.com, free books galore and all kinds of radio archives. And of course, you're going to get your free bonus material at rnareset.com/fibro gifts, Fibro gifts. So we're happy to be able to generously give. Dr. Dean always gloriously and generously gives of her time, her talent, her wisdom, her compassion. And you can hook up with us every Monday evening and watch your notifications for more webinars. I'm sure we'll be doing one in another couple weeks. So anybody know Lady Gaga, want to get this information to her, knock yourself out. I just feel compassion toward her. But anybody with fibro and CFS, please share this information. All right. Thank you so much, Carolyn. Amazing, amazing information. Thank you for all you do.
Thanks, Ginny, and thanks, Chad, and thanks everybody for listening.